Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good night to you, Corrine. Good evening. Okay. Wisdom and shrewdness, or wisdom and sneakiness. Wisdom and I'm looking for what would be a word that would best depict when wisdom is used for evil. Um, I remember my teacher and colleague, Rabbi Gordon Tucker, who we sent a reference, I think, last week, his reaction, his words in light of the elections. Smart guy, and he wrote a responsa on the topic of same-sex marriage and admittance into rabbinical school. It became the same question: could the conservative movement do this? And this was many of you know, this was a topic that was repeatedly shelved for um, for 15 years when it first came up, and kept getting put aside. And every attempt that many of us made to raise it was we were bullied, literally bullied, into being quiet, and that led to my very much being on the outside of the rabbinical, personally, and others. We're being on the outside of the rabbinical assembly, the conservative movement, rabbinic union organization. And one of the stalling tactics to deal with this was that there needed to be long responsa that were well thought out and much debated. And this took, I don't know, 7 years from the minute it started, the actual writing for decisions to be made. And one of the responsa was the one that got the majority of votes, which is, I think, is an embarrassing responsa that says that in the same way we don't question straight couples whether they're going to keep the laws of family purity. The woman's going to go to the mikveh and they're going to abstain from having sex or even touching each other for that period of time each month. We don't assume that male homosexuals will have anal penetration sex, which is really the only thing that the Torah objects to. It was a very, very bizarre way of doing it, and the reasoning was, this is out of respect to people. It was out of respect to people. I remember being infuriated, really so angry about it, and my good friend and teacher Eli Spitz, who some of you have read before and even met, he said, David, it doesn't matter how it passes. Once it passes, nobody's going to remember how it was passed, except. So I accepted that's the way that organizations work, and people needed to have that process. Except for I do remember, and I remember Gordon Tucker's response, which got no votes at all in the committee, and his response began with saying, "I went to yeshiva when I was young, and there were wise guys. The wise guys, the ones we call wise guys, were the ones that were constantly playing with halachic literature to justify the bad behavior that they were doing." And I remember that being an example of wisdom in the service of evil. Now, not to say this is the same thing, but we see a lot of seriously smart people in light of the elections. I'm thinking right now in Israel, a huge amount of very, very sophisticated shrewdness for doing injustice. And that's happening right now. I don't know how many of you follow the more detailed news of what's happening in Israel, but there's serious challenges, legal challenges to the prime minister, which have been going on for many, many years. And once again, he attempted to put them off by saying there's a war going on. The court thankfully did not accept that as a reason to postpone the trial any longer. But there have been some very, very sinister accusations about changing minutes of meetings having to do with the beginning of the war and what was known, what wasn't known. And I marvel at this. I marvel at it's what I see here in the United States with the amount of thought and smarts going into what resulted in the results of this election. There was a lot of brain power that went into this. This isn't just it happened, right? And it's not just, I think the people on the liberal side were bungling. I don't think that's it. I think there's been a huge amount of manipulation done by some very, very smart people. And we have a tendency, I have a tendency often to think that the other side is crude and, for instance, is less sophisticated. And I think that's one of the lessons I think we all need to learn, that no, that's not the case. There's a lot of serious wisdom. I don't want to use the word wisdom, a lot of serious smarts going on. And that's in the background of our study today. All that was was an introduction to us going on in this chapter 5, which I'm not sure we're going to finish today because there's a few things I want to widen the discussion on. Did anybody want to bring up anything from last week before we actually go back to the text to verse 7? Okay, so we are in a chapter that is one of those chapters that makes use of a woman being not only a symbol, a feminine symbol of wisdom, chokhmah, but also of the opposite, of being lured, being seduced into doing the wrong thing. And so we continue with that in the background, although in this next section, it gets pretty sexual, at least in the innuendo. So maybe try to pick out those things as we read. Les, you want to read for us 7:14, please?
Sure. So now, sons, pay heed to me, and do not swerve from the words of my mouth. Keep yourself far away from her. Do not come near the doorway of her house, lest you give up your vigor to others, your years to a ruthless one, lest strangers eat their fill of your strength, and your toil be for the house of another. And in the end, you roar when your flesh and body are consumed and say, oh, how I hated discipline and heartily spurned rebuke. I did not pay heed to my teachers or incline my ear to my instructors. Soon I was in dire trouble amidst the assembled congregation.
Okay. So a few parts to that. Initial reactions.
Well, it certainly, not only does it do what we talked about last time, and that it uses the woman as luring and as a symbol of luring to bad ways, but it makes the receiver of the wisdom weak and easily tempted.
Right. It's kind of an ongoing process of once you pass by the door and you allow yourself to be lured in, seduced, then there's almost a sapping of your strength. And that's the sexual innuendo that I wanted to bring up here. I'm thinking directly of Jacob's blessings or his words of prophecy to his sons when they're standing around his deathbed. And does anybody happen to remember what he says to Reuven, his firstborn? You know what? Let me pull it up. I didn't. Let's get the Hebrew English mode. Yeah, I'm sorry I didn't have this ready. I just kind of thought of it now. Okay. Why didn't Jacob call his sons, come together that I may tell you what is to befall you in the days to come? Assemble, O hearken, O sons of Jacob, hearken to Israel your father. Jacob and Israel, the same person. It begins with Ruvain, Bechoriata, Kochi v'reshit oni, Yeter se'et v'yeter oz. Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might and first fruit of my vigor, exceeding in rank and exceeding in honor. Of course, then he goes on to diss him and saying, you're unstable as water and you excel no longer. And because you had sex with my concubine, you brought disgrace and you're out of here, right? That's the kind of the justification as to why Reuben, who's the firstborn, does not get any leadership. He's not in a leadership role in the stories or in the history of Israel afterwards. So what I'm focusing here is this verse, right? Is this section right here? Is this part, right? You were my firstborn, the first of my strength, right? My might and my strength, first fruit of my vigor. And those words are echoed in our section here, right? Anybody realize what in the simplest way what he's talking about, the poet? And in Proverbs here, Proverbs is hinting towards semen, right? The first of my strength, the reshit only my kochi. That's all innuendo for the great show of masculinity is between the legs and when you can impregnate, when your seed is strong, and giving your first of your seed is considered to be the great. That's why firstborn are better than the others. It's the first of your seed. Yeah, it's very, very what would be the word?
Sexual.
No, I was going to say toxic masculinity, maybe. Yeah, Megan, I think you understand what I'm saying. There's something here which, when read, I think in context of how, and this what I've said now is not interpretation. It's the understand. Well, it's interpretation, but it's the simple, the contextual meaning of these words is that's how it is in the man's world. And so the flip side of that is to give your semen, your strength, your sap, if you will, to another woman. Going back to our section here, as part of the metaphorical language, you're giving the best of your life. And once you walk by, and once you start, then that evil she of the that's what I started with this.
Froze.
David, you're frozen.
You're frozen.
If he's frozen, he won't hear us.
Um,
He has to realize it and probably have to log off and log back on.
I'm going to send him a chat.
Okay. No, that won't
And I'll
work
send him
either.
a text.
The text will work, but not a chat.
Oh, okay.
Zoom is his Zoom is. It might just be his internet, which means, but probably this long is probably not just the internet. It's,
Yeah, he logged off. He logged off and he'll
and
log back on.
on. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, he says he played back. He said, "I'm disconnected, working on it."
Okay. Why is the burden always put on the woman here?
Because that's the way it was, and maybe still is.
Still is, yeah. I think it still is, Les, unfortunately.
Really?
Well, I think
Well,
Les,
it also, I mean, it's tribal. It's tribal. It's, you know, patriarchal, tribal.
Well, that patriarchal, I understand.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, that's
al-
what that's,
I think
yeah,
it's
that's,
also today, if a woman is raped or something like that, she's put through the coals of what type of person she is. So it's
Double standard. Double standard.
Double standard.
Yeah.
True.
You're muted, David.
We'll try it this way. I've switched from my Wi-Fi to my phone, which also doesn't have a lot of bars, but we'll give it a try. don't know. What did I miss? When I got to the crescendo, the best part. What did you say, Megan? Please repeat it for me.
No, you're muted.
Megan, you're muted.
We're all sapping our energy. It started with Eileen saying, why is it always the women? And then we went to, well, that was ancient times. Then we went, no, it's still going on today. Then I mentioned in some situations of rape and stuff like that of a woman, she's put through the coals of her history, this or that. What did she do? It's still going on today, as it was in ancient times.
And it's clearly patriarchal and tribal.
We're back to toxic masculinity. Yeah, look at that. I think many of us agree that that's in the background of the abortion issue. That's in the background of the behavior of so many men. Still, there seemed to be some sort of progress. It feels like maybe we're at a setback right now, or we're at a freeze. Yeah, but what I don't want us to do is to just see that in the other. Is for us to look at ourselves as well. I'm talking not just to the men here, I think to the women, to all of us, to look and make sure that we're not continuing those kinds of behavior that we grew up with, or that we assumed, or that we're, it's being absorbed by us living in this world. And I'm not saying that it is, but I want us to check ourselves. Again, going forward after this election time, for me is a period of us checking ourselves, is making sure, let's set ourselves in order, our own houses in order, while we continue to battle what we see as the forces of the other side. Let's not say evil right now, but yes, that's one of the issues. Yeah. And of course then, right? So that's then. So I was just about to get to this kind of interesting conversation that's recorded here, because it says the teacher, nu, as we'd say in Israel, oy vavoy, as Richard loves to say, oy vavoy, this is what you're going to say on your deathbed, as your strength has been totally sapped from you. You're totally depleted, your life force, your energy. Yeah, I'm thinking of Star Wars movie when they're in the fight with the Force, whatever, and the Force gets sapped by Darth Vader or whoever the bad guy is. And then comes this, and in the end you roar, right? With the last of your strength, you shout out, right? When your flesh and your body are consumed. And oi, I hated discipline, and I spurned rebuke, and I didn't pay attention to my teachers, which include, of course, my parents, or my father in this case. And everything here is paralleled, right? I hated discipline, spurned rebuke, did not pay heed to teachers, did not incline my ear to instructors, and I found myself in dire trouble amidst the assembled congregation. And that's a little bit, I don't really have a great betoch kahal ve'edah. I don't have a great understanding of that yet, but I think it is, I've taken myself out of normative society, right? I allowed myself to be like that. In other words, society is not like this. There are parts of society that could lure one into the wrong path, but that's not the majority. Right? I've taken myself out of, I mean, why both terms, kal ve'edah? I don't have a great answer for that yet, and I didn't dig deep into. I have a feeling there would be some medieval interpretation there, but I've talked enough. Other views of this particular section that we just did. Roberta, we're on the last week's page 7 to 14, and speaking of women,
We're slow.
it should be in the chat box. I can add it again.
Yeah, no.
Okay, anybody?
Yep.
Rita Claire, yes.
You know, going back to the importance of the firstborn, um, I view it in a different way, of course. You know, as you all know, I have several children, and each one is just as important as the other. But I have to honestly say, yes, there is something a little special about the firstborn. I think that's just a natural thing. There's even something a little special about the last one to be born. Does that take away from the importance of the person themselves? I don't think so. I think there's an entirely different meaning.
Mhm. Dan?
Yeah, I'm getting sense I'm getting from this passage and looking ahead to the next one is an admonition to stay close to what you've been taught, stay close to your traditions, don't look outside what's been close to home. And so it's a very opposite of what you I think started this session with, which is try and understand the other.
Yes,
That's what I'm getting out of this.
right. There is no understanding the other here.
Yeah.
This is stay away from the other. Don't have internet on your phone. Have a flip phone, right? You know that thing in the ultra-Orthodox community. No smartphones, right? No regular newspapers.
Right.
No TV.
Right.
No movies. Look, we weren't allowed to go. We were,
Right.
you know, movies were kind of a no-no when I was in the Orthodox world. Because every movie has the possibility, even well, they didn't have those ratings then, but even movies that might be considered family movies today, there's always some way you can go down the wrong path by looking at a woman. No looking at women, right? No looking at the hair of women. So yeah, and that's not just Jewish wisdom, right? That you find that in other traditions as well. That's covering a woman's head or hair considered to be something erotic in many traditions. Yeah. So what I wanted to say was, again, my point was that I don't think we should do that. I don't think we serve ourselves well when we I mean, I'm just struck by I don't we shouldn't be making this political on an official thing, but the choices for government positions. And so we go, how well there's something going on that we don't understand, or that maybe that there's something going on that I haven't paid attention to that's been successful that I don't want to turn away. And that means turning to different channels as well. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly how to do it, but it's something I want to work on. Yeah. Eileen, something else?
Well, first of all, I was just gonna say, when we turn the TV on, we close the drapes. Because God forbid the kids in the neighborhood who are playing in our yard would see something on the TV.
Yeah.
But it's hard to try and understand our new president's choices, the things that are going on, and not you want to try and understand, but it seems so irrational. I don't know how you can't understand. I think there's a great plan. I don't think any of this is just off the cuff. I think there's a great plan going on. I think that his election was highly predictable. Highly predictable. I worked in the African American community on the south side of Chicago most of my professional career, and I can tell you that I do not know of one African American male that I encountered in my work that would have voted for a Black woman. No way. And when I worked with African-American women who were in authority, they never wanted their underlings to rise up to gain to their status. They literally would keep them where they were in their place.
Hmm.
Men or women under subordinate?
Pardon?
Well, you said the women.
The women were doing it to themselves.
To other women,
Yes.
but they also do it to a male. They wouldn't let a male subordinate rise
No,
to their level.
no. Well, first of all, in early childhood education, there weren't a lot of men. So it's hard for me to make a blanket statement.
Getting back to the text, I keep going back to the weakness of the receiver of this heed or warning. I mean, yes, they're describing all the things that can lead that person astray, but just how easily these people, our people, are led astray. On the other hand, we see how that happens, people being led astray very easily. So I'm going back and forth, like how weak these people are, and yes, how weak some of us are.
Mhm.
So I'm focusing on that more than the metaphor.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Right, the message of, yeah, how easily it is to be led astray.
Yeah.
Even though at the end of this, it's like, but in the end, you're going to regret it. And yet we do it anyway.
And the blame is not on the people who are leading others astray. The blame is on the person who's being allowed to be led astray.
yeah. So
Hmm.
this might be an interesting text to do with those who are in recovery from addiction. There's a lot of those. I wouldn't be surprised if it
Well,
was
the whole
used.
issue of willpower and free will and all that stuff.
Right.
I wanted to, can I say one thing?
Please,
about
and
that
you never,
toxic-
ever have to ask permission.
Okay, I'm way back with the toxic masculinity, and then when you said we need to take a look at ourselves, and I do agree with that, because now I'm gonna be shot by some of my sisterhoods, but I encounter toxic feminism too,
Mhm.
that
Oh,
somehow we have to get a balance that we're all together and we're all in this thing together. I guess you need the right people to be with, but I just wanted to balance out that with my observation there.
yeah, but Rabbi's point, listening to others, we should put ourselves in the company of people that are not like us to begin to understand where they're coming from, their mindset.
Sasha and I were at a wedding, and the person who sat down next to me is a man who just turned 60, who I didn't get what he did until then, but he's devoting at least a year to working with homeless. He's found Jesus Christ. And he did not pick up at all, even though I was pretty open about what I do and what we are, had a lot of questions. He did not pick up at all who he was talking to. But he did stress how important his men's group was. He has a men's group that he's part of. And then I observed him saying some very inappropriate thing to the very young woman in her 20s who was sitting next to him, single woman who was there both of them without a date. And thinking to myself, this person seems to be in a bubble. First of all, as a belief, he made a comment about Islam. He was careful not to make a comment about Judaism per se. He didn't know very much, but he knew a lot about how Islam is the exact opposite of Christianity. He talked about working with homeless, and many of them are addicted, but he doesn't deal with the addiction. That's for the Lord Jesus Christ to deal with. That's the relationship with Jesus. it just felt like here's a man who is living in a bubble in Temecula. And what struck me with that was the men's group kind of a thing. I started to hear about men's group at a Limud conference in England. I think it was in England, and it was led by a rabbi who I very much admire and consider a teacher. And thinking to myself, I don't understand that. I don't want I didn't understand women's group in the beginning when in the 90s when some of the women asked me if they could do a Rosh Chodesh group at my congregation in Jerusalem. I said, I don't think you should do it in the synagogue because we're an egalitarian synagogue. If you want to do it at home, that's of course, and you want to say that you're doing, but I don't think it should be a Yar Amot, that was the name of the synagogue, official activity because we're egalitarian. I don't see the need for it. Then somebody enlightened me, and I was like, she says, listen, when you guys get together and you're studying Parshat HaShavua, most of us women were embarrassed to open up our mouths. We didn't have the education you did. We're talking about women who are my age or older, right? We didn't have that education. And I stood corrected. I said, okay, I understand that. I said, still, I don't want that to be an official thing of the congregation because I want us to feel we're gender equal. And it was a big deal. It was, I was the rabbi that brought that to that synagogue. And then I found out, the men's group, I said, but we're not the ones that, and I never went, I've never gone, so I don't know exactly what is talked about and how it's talked about, but it just struck me, this guy here is living in a bubble, and his inappropriate comments to this young woman was just a great example of it. What am I trying to say? Is that the fact that we are gender combined, and now hopefully of all kinds of LGBTQ plus relationships are talked about, to me, that means that we're in that better world, right? Of respecting and not speaking, not being tone deaf in how we speak towards others, especially I'm feeling as a man. But here it is, we've got people that I respect very much that feel men's groups are very important. I don't know. I don't know what to or LGBTQ congregations, separate congregations, less today, but there's still many people that I run into in the Jewish world who very much feel that that's something, that's important. I remember being interviewed in Jerusalem at some world event for Pride, and the interviewer asked me, do you think that in Israel we should also have, this was in Hebrew, do you think in Israel we should also have gay lesbian congregations like the Sharon Klein, Rabbi Sharon Kleinberg was in, she was standing next to me in the conference, the news conference from see what's it called, New Les, what's it called in New York? A congregation, Simchat Torah, Beit Simchat Torah, really one of the leading LGBTQ congregations. And I said, I don't think, listen, it's not up to me. I'm a straight man, part of my thing, but I would like to think that the congregations that I'm involved with, many are involved with, are so welcoming that there's no need to have a separate thing. And yet, at the other hand, it's not my place to say that there is no need for it, right? I don't know. Les, do you want to chime in on this issue? We spoke a little bit about this the other day.
No, I mean, I guess people are in different places, and the kind of people that 40 years ago that felt the need to combine their Jewishness and their queerness, for lack of a better word, to bring them together, the only place they could do it was in a LGBT-focused synagogue. That's not true anymore. On the other hand, all these different places are different, and mainstream congregations that are welcoming to LGBT congregants, many of them, they're very different. And again, it's like 31 flavors. So why there are so many streams of Judaism? There are some that fit people, and there's some that don't fit, or I like, chocolate better than vanilla,
That's a great way. That's a new icebreaker. I never thought of an icebreaker with a group. Describe which of the 31 flavors is your Judaism. Richard, which one is yours? You can think about it. I'll ask you.
No. That's my favorite.
Okay, so look at, to me, this paragraph brings up a lot of gender issues, but the end, I did see, while I snuck a peek at Michael Fox's commentary about those last two words, and then I did look, oh, I snuck a peek also, there is no rabbinic wisdom here that I thought there might be. I just thought, because of that pairing of betoch kahal ve'ida, two very almost technical terms in the Torah, about the community. What Fox says is it's about public shaming. This idea of public shaming, that it's not going to happen to you. There's nothing here about you're going to get in trouble with God in the afterlife, right? That's not what's being said here. What's being said here is that you will be shamed publicly.
Mhm.
And then that brings us also, is public shaming, what might we say? Public shaming ain't what it used to be, right? It doesn't, or, I don't know. Okay, anything else on this section before we go on? All right then, but I did want to, there's a rather bizarre tradition in Masechet Smachot that I did want to take a look at, that makes use of this last assumed conversation, end of days conversation. What is tractate Smachot? I'm at the top of the second side of the page. Anybody guess what Smachot means? What word do you see there, Dan?
Simcha or
Right.
smicha.
Right, so you'd think it would be the tractate of joyous occasions, right? Except for it has all the laws. By the way, this is not a Talmudic tractate. This is a post-Talmudic tractate. That is something after the Babylonian Talmud and the Talmud of the Land of Israel. They were already codified or closed, edited, and there are a number of what we call minor tractates. This is the largest of the minor tractates, if I think size-wise, and this is combining traditions from all over the Talmud and maybe some others as well about death. And so it's kind of, this is what we call Lashon Sagi Nahor. The biblical rabbinic Hebrew often uses the opposite to state something. And I don't know if this has to do with superstition. You don't say whatever, but if we say somebody's very, very smart, what you mean is they're not very smart, right? Somebody's very, very modest. No, they're not very modest. Maybe it's irony. I don't know exactly where it comes from, but it's a common thing, especially when things have to do with negative parts of life. And so maybe it stems from superstition, not to say things out loud, right? That are the bad things. So the tractate that deals with death and death mourning customs is Masechet Smachot, and it's not just laws, it's also stories as we have here. Dan, why don't you give it a try?
We do not take out the dead on a bier unless his head and the greater part of his body are there. Rabbi Judah said, the spinal column and the skull constitute the greater part. It is related of the son of Rabbi Hanina ben Teraja.
That's all I just say. So this is the law that's given, right? Apropos bodies that have been mangled in explosions or catastrophes. Now, the beer being the stretcher, right? To the plank on which you are carried. We do it a little bit differently now. We have coffins. In the land of Israel, the custom has been to bury without a coffin. I think many of you know that. The body is wrapped in shrouds, is taken on a stretcher by family members or men or the members of the burial society, the Chevra Kadisha, taken to the graveside and then gently slid down into the open grave, which on top of cinder blocks. One of the best pieces of advice I got in my first month, I think, of being a rabbi in '93 at that same congregation, I did a funeral together with the family. Had been in touch with the Reform Synagogue, one of my older colleagues. I think he's passed away, and he said, I watched him do stuff. I said, I never did funerals. Nobody taught us to do funerals, or ironically, nobody taught us to do funerals in rabbinical school, right? It wasn't because conservative rabbis didn't really do funerals. They maybe spoke, but they weren't responsible for anything. And so he says, I'll tell you what to do in the case of a man who's wrapped in his talit over the shrouds. The talit in most cases was taken off. The person is not buried in his talit, regardless of what some people do here. They would take off the talit, and he said, then hold up the talit so that people can't see the body being slid down into the grave. That's all I'm trying to say. Another thing he said to me, he says, if there's people from abroad, make sure you tell them what's going to happen beforehand, because they could be horrified by this. Okay, now what happens if the body's disfigured? That's what this is a law about. And this brings us to modern day practice in Israel, because nobody wanted to think about what happened, what didn't happen. They said for all soldiers in Israel are buried in caskets, in plain wooden caskets, so that nobody will think about the ones that they won't. In other words, everybody. So nobody will think about what shape is the body in. That's at least what we were explained. So that's the exception to the rule of burying in shrouds, unless of course it's a private cemetery, which some kibbutzim did, and I was involved in a lot of those kind of things, or the two burial grounds in all of Israel that were set up by the Reform and the Conservative and a secular movement for people to be buried any way they want to be buried. So that could be in a casket as well. Okay. Oh, and finally, one of the things that I, in my early contact with the gay community, and I was involved with the AIDS task force, and I was asked to be present or to officiate at funerals. And I learned that many of the gay men who had died of AIDS had asked to be buried in caskets. It was important for them so that nobody would see how, I think the word is emaciated. Am I using that word right? How they could see through the shrouds, how, they didn't want their friends to see what their bodies look like, which would have never occurred to me, of course. Was lent me another layer of sensitivity, I hope. Okay, so that's in the background here. There's got to be a certain minimum part. There's a little gory, I understand. It's a minimum part, but now comes the part that why I brought this. Go ahead.
It is related of the son of Rabbi Hanina ben Teradion that he took to evil ways, and robbers seized and killed him. After 3 days, his swollen body was found. They placed him in a coffin, set him on a bier, took him into the city, and paid him a eulogy out of respect for his father and mother. His father quoted over him the verse, and thou moan when thine end cometh, when thy flesh and thy body are consumed, and say, how have I hated instruction, and my heart despised reproof? Neither have I hearkened to the voice of my teachers, nor inclined my ear to them that instructed me. I was well nigh in all evil in the midst of the congregation and assembly.
And that, of course, is just an older translation of the last part of the section we read. Right? That would, my guess would be the old JPS translation from the beginning of the 20th century, because the translation of Smachot that's in Sefaria is an older translation. Many, probably, I don't know from when, but it's been around since I was a student. So, so the halacha here is really not that's not the important. The halacha is just an excuse to tell a story about how one of the rabbis, one of the sages, was mourning and giving a eulogy, kind of a eulogy about his son who had gone down the wrong path, just to show, at least in somebody's mind, how it was used. I'm constantly working with mostly children, brothers and sisters of deceased here. And as you can imagine, I see so many different sets of complicated relationships between parents and children, between siblings, between cousins and friends, and there's all sorts of stuff. And I'm often finding myself asking people to reconsider how they're going to talk, knowing that they want to say certain things, and it often doesn't help. Probably every third funeral, I'd say there are what I would consider, and I'm pretty open, right? What I would consider are inappropriate stories about for them, that maybe they should wait until people get to the bar afterwards to talk, but not at the graveside. But here's somebody.
It's really, and I told you so
Yeah, absolutely. You think? Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, can you imagine? And yet you have to admire the honesty of this rabbinic book, right? That adds this to a sage. Rita Claire, did you want to say something? No, okay. Someone else before we go on. Okay, then. Um, Rita Claire, do you want to read 1520 for us? Are you up for that?
Drink water from your own cistern, running water from your own well. Excuse me. Oh dear. I am so sorry.
That's all right. Can we get somebody else to read?
Let me, yes, please.
Okay. Richard, you want to take over, please?
Yeah, okay. Drink water from your own cistern, running water from your own well. Your springs will gush forth in streams in the public squares. They will be yours alone. Others having no part with you. Let your fountain be blessed. Find joy in the wife of your youth, a loving doe, a graceful mountain goat. Let her breast satisfy you at all times. Be infatuated with love of her always. Why be infatuated, my son, with a forbidden woman? Why clasp the bosom of an alien woman?
Hmm. Now, does anybody hear any echoes of a different text, biblical text here?
Song of Songs.
Absolutely. Yeah, we could probably do word for word. We didn't, but so many of these terms come from that erotic love poetry in the Song of Songs. Yeah. There's a bit of seems like a bit of infatuation here with the breasts, which many men, I think is kind of a common thing. But and then the wife of your youth, implying what? Possibly.
The traditions you grew up with. That's what I
But
get out of it.
there might be a wife of your youth
Yeah, more than one wife.
and a wife of your not youth, right? I have a student that, well, Richard knows the name because his parents have been very generous to us. But every other week, one of the highlights of my month is every other week I sit with Daniel, who's a 17-year-old in the outskirts of Philadelphia, who's extremely bright. We've been studying together since before his bar mitzvah. We prepared. We did it during the pandemic online, and then I joined his family a few years ago, the year afterwards, and we did it at the temple at the Temple Mount, outside of the Temple Mount, in the egalitarian part of the Kotel. And we've just finished Samuel, and we've begun Kings now. We've done a lot over the years, but right now we're doing Samuel. We did Judges, Samuel, Kings, and it's like he just thinks it's hysterical that King David had so many wives. And the last scene, anybody remember the last of David's wives? It's a woman named Avishag. It's at the very beginning of Kings, Avishag, and it says David is old and decrepit, and he's cold and he can't get warm. So they find for him this beautiful young woman to be in bed with him. Her name is Avishag. And I remember Zakovich teaching this to us and saying, he says, look how pathetic the man who was chasing skirts all of his lives. I mean, so many different women he was with, many of them belonging to other men when he got together with them, not just Bathsheba, but also Abigail. And here he is, he's totally impotent in bed with this beautiful young woman. And then she becomes an object over who's going to get the throne after David. Is it going to be Solomon or is it going to be Adoniah? It's very, very dramatic stuff. And so I'm reminded again, this idea of multiple wives and what that does, considering our previous conversation about the status of women, right? The fact that there can be multiple wives, there cannot be multiple husbands. And David, who is glorified in our tradition, yet in the text itself, he's a schmuck. He's totally a schmuck when it comes to these things. Okay, so all this is in the background here. The language of drinking from wells and wisdom I don't know, in my, I assume it exists in English in Western culture that I know that I often will say, well, there's an expression, don't spit, or there's another word is used sometimes in the well that you drink from, right? I often say to people who are kind of amazed and fascinated knowing the kind of rabbi I am, that I know so much about Chabad and I know the melodies and I know their customs because when I was a teenager, we hung out around Chabad a lot. And I am proud to have drunken from that well. I'm also proud to have moved on to other wells, right? Not staying at that well, but I'm very proud and very I'm full of gratitude. And when I'm with Chabad, colleagues, and something comes up, I'll often tell them a story. And a lot of the guys out here, they know the rabbis that I grew up with, some of whom are no longer living in the LA area. And they love stories, right? Hasidim love stories about rabbis and how they did, little maisalach. So I'm proud of that. I'm proud of the fact of drinking from different wells. But here it's pretty drink from your own well, right? And the fact that Torah is often compared in general wisdom to water. It's life force. And not just any water, but what water in particular? Running water. Running water is not stagnant water, but running water. I also love that metaphor. In order for the water to be effective from a wisdom point of view, it should be running. It shouldn't be stagnant in one place. Anything else? Any other comments? All right, so Dan, why don't you do the Avot Rabbi Natan is kind of part of that same post-Talmudic tractates. This is a Talmud, as if a Talmud on the chapters of the Father. We run into this from time to time. A lot of really good material. Land of Israel. Well, there's two versions, but whatever one. Go ahead. Avot Rabbi Natan.
Rabbi Meir says, if you studied with one teacher, do not say, that's enough for me. Rather, go to another sage and study Torah. But do not go to just anyone. Rather, go to someone who has been close to you from the start. As it says in Proverbs, drink water from your own cistern, that which flows from your own well.
So let's take a look at what's actually been said right here.
Seneca saying, get different opinions, but not too far afield.
Right. Don't stray too far, right? You want to have another rabbi? Okay, but make sure that he's Orthodox, or make sure that he's Hasidic, or make sure he's this kind of Hasidic, or yeah. So all right. So okay, go ahead.
Rabbi Yehoshua says, marry a woman in your youth and marry a woman in your old age. Have children in your youth and have children in your old age. Do not say, I will not marry a woman. Rather, marry a woman and have sons and daughters, and be fruitful and multiply greatly in the world. For you do not know if both of them will work out for you, or if both of them will be equally good. As it says in Ecclesiastes, sow your seed in the morning.
Okay. All right, so Eileen, you're not happy with this.
No, not at all. I'm sorry.
Okay, so an interesting comment, but this led me to think of another story. Apropos, again, lessons are taught by using parables or metaphors that are based on things that are very close to men. Sex is really close to not all men, but in these times, all men who talked about sex, it was about heterosexual sex, very much on their minds. So it's not the fact that many of us grew up in a Judaism where we didn't learn these stories in Hebrew school should not lead us to believe that it's not part of Judaism. The fact that, yes, I happen to know a lot of this kind of stuff. This is my interest, I'm honest about it, but it's there. There's a ton of stuff in rabbinic literature and biblical literature as well, which is very erotic or very sexual. And so it's natural to use this topic. The byproduct can be certainly male chauvinism, but also misogyny as well. Because the more you use, my point last week about using the image of a barren woman to symbolize Jerusalem, the more you use women in a literary way, the more you objectify them, And that leads us to problems, objectification of women per se by men. But this reminded me of this particular explanation of a phrase which is still used today in Hebrew, in modern Hebrew, and that is a person, if you Yotzei kareach mikan mikan. I know that I've shared this with some of you before, but no, that's not where we want to go. Right? Okay, why does it say my screen is paused? How do I don't understand that. Okay, maybe there's not enough bandwidth.
Give
So
me
I
a
will-
second, let me check. Can you try again?
Trying now. Still, okay, so then I'll just have to read it to you. Oh, now can you see it?
Yes.
All right, so go, Dan, go ahead and read this, would you?
Rav Ami and Rav Asi. Rav Ami and Rav Asi sat before Rabbi Yitzchak Napaha. One sage said to Rabbi Yitzchak Napaha, "Let the master say words of halacha." And the other sage said to Rabbi Yitzchak Napaha, "Let the master say words of agadah." Rabbi Yitzchak Napaha began to say words of agadah, but one sage did not let him. So he began to say words of halacha, but the other sage did not let him.
Okay, it doesn't matter what the Agadah, that is traditions about belief and feelings, what it was about, or what the tradition of halacha, that is what you do, how you legal customs and how you behave. Those are the two basic categories of Jewish rabbinic literature. Doesn't matter which is what, but we have this a lot, right? On panel discussions on news programs, especially Israeli news programs. One won't let the other one finish. They're constantly interrupting themselves. So that is the phenomena that the Talmud wants to talk about. Not the particular halacha, the particular agadah, but the fact that people won't let each other speak properly. They keep interrupting yourselves. Go ahead.
Rabbi Yitzchak Napaha said to them, "I will relate a parable. To what can this be compared? It can be compared to a man who has two wives, one young and one old. The young wife pulls out his white hairs so that her husband will appear younger. The old wife pulls out his black hairs so that he will appear older. And it turns out he is bald from here and from there, that is completely bald due to the action of both his wives."
Right. This is an expression that people use in Hebrew when you try to do something, you end up losing on all accounts. You try to appease everybody, you try to no, you'd say that you're going to just end up bald from here and from there. Yeah, so again, it seems like it's kind of innocent, right? But again, objectifying women in this way to teach men to teach the message is a challenging thing. It's something for us to think twice about. I'm not saying we shouldn't use the expression Yotzei kareach mikan mikan or others. Not every, I don't think we need to go back to the roots of every expression because we'll be in trouble with many, but still something for us to think about.
It reminds me of the Catskills male comedians that would say things about their wives.
Yeah. And by the way, there's an answer to that in feminist or younger women stand up who often talk about their men in that way or sometimes they're talking about their girlfriends as well, but I'm not sure that's any better. There's the humor that's based on objectifying is, I don't know, maybe that takes out everything okay. Let's go on to the last bit here if we could.
Oh.
Roberta, you want to read
Yeah.
for us 21, 23?
But isn't there also the fact that a lot of women are now wanting to marry younger men?
I don't know. I don't hang out in those bars that,
That's why I would definitely agree with the statement, find joy in the wife of your youth or the husband of your youth.
Okay,
That really stands out for me.
and then a period, right?
A period, yes, definitely.
All right, Rebecca, let's do the last part.
21, 23.
Yes, please.
For everyone's ways are before the eyes of God, who surveys their entire course. The wicked man will be trapped in his iniquities. He will be caught up in the ropes of his sin. He will die for lack of discipline, infatuated by his great folly.
Kind of cynical, but echoing the last tradition on the previous page, I think, yeah. And I think the idea in this chapter overall is this interconnectedness that once you're in it, it grabs onto you and then it feeds off. You can't, don't start because you'll never get out of it. It very much reminds me of working with people with addiction and how we use Jewish sources to help bring up and discuss issues of self-discipline. Any final comments, folks?
Who is going to be trapped? He's going to be trapped in his iniquities and the ropes of his sin. The Lord is going to take action against this.
I think the idea is the young man who's not listening to the wisdom of his father or his teacher, he has walked by the doorway of that seductress of evil and the bad kind of wisdom. Once he goes into that door, he'll find himself tied to it. His sins will rope him up. He'll be trapped in what he's doing. I think that's a very graphic way of, once you're in, there's no way out. Yeah, okay. All right, everybody. So we have the text for next week. Madalena will send it out again. Thank you, Madalena, for setting everything up. And we'll see some of you tomorrow. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.